Everybody to that AI for Good edition for September. So today we have the great pleasure of having Professor David Yang, who's a professor of economics at Harvard. He's a faculty research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research. He's also a global scholar at CIFAR. CIFAR is that AI place in Canada. He's a fellow at BRAID. His research focus, even though he's an economist, but his research focus is really on political economy. Like you can see from his research, from his article. In particular, he's interested in the forces of stability and forces of challenges in authoritarian regimes, drawing lessons from historical and contemporary data from China. David received his BA and BS in business administration from UC Berkeley. Maybe that's why he's very interested in protest. And he received his PhD in economics from Stanford, an excellent place. And now he's one of probably the #1 department in the country or maybe in the world at Harvard. So here today he's going to talk to us about the concept of AI-tocracy and the international consequences of that theory. So the floor is yours, David.
Okay, well, great. Thank you so much for having me. I'm extremely excited to share some of our recent research on this topic with you, and very much looking forward to the discussion that we can have together on this topic. Well, let me share my slides. So also feel free if there's any sort of clarification question, if there's any sort of terms or so on that wasn't clear. Some of them might be just coming from economics. Feel free to raise your hand and clarify. Okay. So what I'm going to talk to you today is drawing from two papers that we have recently finished. Talks about sort of AI and in relationship between artificial intelligence and the Chinese regime, and a second part of it is thinking about how that relationship is affecting potentially how AI is being diffused around the world. Okay, so I want to start a bit more general from a more academic and intellectual perspective to think about the question. Now, economists have been for decades sort of come to a consensus of what we think is a fairly general consensus among political economists that authoritarian regimes are fundamentally misaligned with frontier innovation and frontier technical change. Okay, scholars might disagree on exactly why such a misalignment might come into place, but I think broadly speaking, over the last sort of 4 or 5 decades, this is the general agreement. Okay, one example of such a recent case is the argument put forward by Duran Smogo and Jim Robinson in Why Nations Fail that many of you might be familiar with. So broadly speaking, the argument is that strong democratic institution, inclusive institution is fundamental to generate growth and innovation. And when you have more growth and innovation, the society gets richer, and a richer society is going to have population that's going to start to demand for democracy, demand for more inclusive institutions. So these things are mutually reinforcing. So broadly speaking, you're going to see authoritarian regimes are not happening at the technological frontier. Okay. There are several reasons why political economists have been considering why authoritarian regimes is not compatible with frontier innovation. The first broad camp is that they think authoritarian regimes is not able to offer credible commitment to investors. Okay, if there's no strong protection of property rights, and if I'm an investor or entrepreneurs who try to invest in new technology, who's going to guarantee that the benefits of the investments is not going to be reaped or confiscated by the regime tomorrow? And if I'm not secure of that, and if the regime is not able to credibly commit to not confiscate, I'm not going to sufficiently invest, and that's going to dampen the regime's ability to produce better innovation. Okay, that oftentimes you can see cases of real risk of confiscation in the case of China, for example, and in many other authoritarian regimes. The second broad reason why people think that authoritarian regimes are not compatible with frontier innovation is that a lot of disruptive technology is just not going to be helpful for the regime stability. Okay, with the arrival of internet, with the arrival of oftentimes key information technology, regimes might be scared of the disruption that this generates, and anticipating that potential disruption, the authoritarian regimes may not be very eager to promote or provide environment where such technology can be developed in the first place. Okay, regardless of what's the sources, we think that you don't expect to see authoritarian regimes and frontier innovation to come hand in hand together. Now, what I'm going to focus on today, artificial intelligence, which many of you probably don't need any further motivation, which is considered as the building block of the fourth industrial revolution, might actually challenge some of our understanding and some of our sort of current consensus on political economy equilibrium that I just described. Okay, take this particular example. I'm going to focus on facial recognition AI today, but it might extend to many other the aspects of artificial intelligence as well. This is the ranking of, I think this is coming from 2021, the ranking of the top facial recognition algorithms around the world, and it's held by competition by NIST, which is the agency in the U.S. government, every year. Now you see from this ranking that all of the top 5 of the facial recognition algorithm in terms of accuracy and in terms of the speed are developed by the Chinese companies, and 6 out of the top 10 are developed by Chinese companies, and 2 of them are of the top 10 are Russian developers. Okay, so this is if you look at the ranking of who stands at the frontier of facial recognition, artificial intelligence, you see a landscape that looks very different, where the frontier is dominated by the US and by Western Europe. Okay, so what we are going to sort of argue and hopefully empirically sort of demonstrate in our research is that there could potentially exist a symbiosis between the autocratic governments and the AI innovation that generates the pattern that I just showed you, and then that makes AI differ from the traditional technology that we're familiar with.
David, maybe so. I mean, I can think of 2 industries where like maybe autocracies have maybe done better. Like you could, at least we're pioneers. You could think of space, right? Like Sputnik was done by the Soviet Union. Maybe the nuclear energy in some aspects, right? Like the Soviet Union has been very advanced, and France is very advanced, but it's all like state financed by the state, and so not from the private sector. But it's like maybe areas with very huge, like fixed costs and so on, and so that would explain why. No, maybe no profit opportunities, at least short term, at least for space, for instance.
Yeah, no, exactly. So actually, I think in my last slide, I'm going to come back to the aerospace industry and the nuclear industry. So I think part of my point here is that we're not going to make an argument that every single sector has such symbiosis. And we're also not going to be able to say that AI is the only sector such symbiosis exists. So when you see potential conditions that satisfied, which we're going to lay out in a second, you might anticipate there might exist sort of certain technology and authoritarian regimes that can coexist and can mutually reinforce each other. And exactly as you anticipate, historically, aerospace technology in the Soviet Union and to some extent nuclear technology, also in the Cold War era, might actually be examples where such symbiosis existed in the past. Okay, so in the case of AI, what makes AI sort of special, and what sort of are the conditions in which you might expect such symbiosis exist in the AI case? Well, first is that rather than sort of typically a disruptive technology that destabilizes the authoritarian regimes because it provides more information to the citizens and so on, autocratic governments might actually demand artificial intelligence because fundamentally this is a technology for prediction. And making prediction is something that's extremely useful for predicting people's behavior, predicting people's thoughts, and in general for social and political control. Okay, so there is a case to be made that this is a technology, at least in some dimension, it generates some alignment between the regimes, authoritarian regimes' demand for political stability because they offer a better surveillance technology, and that's allowing potentially sort of the regimes to be to wanting to develop that in the first place. The second part of what makes AI interesting and special is that in addition to traditionally we think what's helpful for developing technology is capital and physical capital and human capital. Well, AI requires data, as we all know. So as a data-intensive technology, typically sort of the government, and especially sort of our authoritarian government, collects a huge amount of data, oftentimes just in the purpose of providing key government functions. And you could expect sort of what economists call the economy of scope to arise from government data, meaning when government provides you data to some firms to do something, for one task, the firm could use that data to fulfill the government's demand, but that same data could be used for multiple purposes simultaneously. And that's going to allow the firm potentially to use that input for many other innovative activities above and beyond what government's demand, direct demand is. And that's going to be able to push sort of the whole industry forward if the data is a big part of the constraints and the input into the technology. So overall, you might think that sort of the autocrats might demand such technology because it's technology for political that's useful for political control, and the autocrats can also provide a lot of useful inputs into technology when they collect that data and able to share the data with the firms who are developing the new technology. Okay, so this is I'm going to focus on facial recognition AI in China first, and then we're going to talk about sort of the global diffusion of this technology. But just to give you an example of the symbiosis, sort of the synergy between, or what we call the economy of scope between the government uses of the data versus the commercial use of the data. So this is an example of a software that's been developed by one facial recognition AI company, where it's a retail space human tracking system, where it's tracking each individual sort of visitors to a retail space, figuring out what's the basic demographic information, but also very importantly using facial recognition to figure out whether that person has been a repeated visitor to the retail space. That's gonna be allowing for some potential for individual personalized targeted ads and so on. Okay, you can see that to develop such technology or such algorithm, the input from the government's side, from public security arms of the government, could be extremely helpful for the firms to be able to use this data and potentially use that algorithm for this type of commercial application. Okay, so what I'm going to do today, two parts. The first part on China domestically, we're going to see whether such mutually reinforcing relationship actually exists in the case of China's facial recognition AI sector. So I'm going to show you 3 different relationships that's going to put this symbiosis together. Okay, so on one hand, I'm going to show you that facial recognition AI technology is technology that's helpful for the regime's political control. So I'm going to show you that when local regions in China experience instability in the form of political unrest and so on, and that's going to induce local governments of China to purchase more facial recognition AI technology to put out in the local public security system. And having more of facial recognition AI technology among the local government in the local governments after they experience the recent instability is going to reduce the likelihood of future political unrest. That's going to make the political control more forceful and make the region more politically quiet. Okay, so that's going to be on the side of the political side. This is technology that can benefit the regime. Then the third link I'm going to show you, this red arrow, is that when local firms are collaborating with the government by giving local governments by selling the facial recognition AI services to the government and analyzing the local government's public security data, that data is going to flow to the firm server, and that's going to allow firm to innovate not just for the government software but also for their commercial software. And that's going to be, for example, the retail tracking system that I just told you earlier, where the commercial innovations push forward when the data is being shared. Okay, so this combined is going to constitute this mutually reinforcing relationship that AI helps the regime, and the regime's collection of data and demand for the technology is useful for the AI sector. Okay, and then towards the end of the talk, I'm going to talk about what this. Given that if this is sort of broadly true for China and then push the Chinese facial recognition firm to the global frontier, what does this mean for the rest of the world? Does that mean that there is a competitive advantage of China in facial recognition AI? And does it mean that through trade and through purchasing of AI products from China, the other countries can also import the civilian state that the local governments in China has been using? Okay, so that's the plan. Let me start with the domestic China, the part that's about China domestically first. Okay, so to show you sort of the errors that I just described to you, we need to collect some information about the firms in China, the facial recognition AI firms in China. What's the relationship with the government, and what's their innovation output? Okay, so so I'm going to show you 3 data sets that we collected for this project, and all these data sets actually are in the public domain, and we simply sort of just collected from the internet. The first one is the very close to the universe of the procurement data on of the Chinese government on facial recognition AI products. Okay, we're gonna match this procurement data with about 8,000 facial recognition AI firms in China. So that's a list of all the facial recognition AI firms. Many of them are tiny and not very active, but these are the universe of all the facial recognition AI firms that will ever exist or active in that space. We matched these firms to about 3 million government contracts who over the course of the last decade across various levels of Chinese government who've been buying various products. Okay, so when we link these two together, that's going to give us about 10,000 AI contracts. So we're going to assume that I'm going to focus on local public security agencies. So these are local police department, local political control bureaus, and so on. We're going to essentially take the assumption that if a local police department is purchasing something from the facial recognition AI firms, they're not buying hardware, sort of batons and so on. They're buying facial recognition AI services. Okay, so that's going to give us about 10,000 AI contracts, which is going to tell us exactly which firm at what point is providing facial recognition AI services to the local police department. Okay. We're then going to link these to the local political unrest that's occurred in China over the last decade, coming from a dataset called GDELT, which is a news-based dataset that's monitoring events around the world. It gives us about 10,000 unrest events that are happening throughout China. So many of them are very local unrest and small scale unrest, but nonetheless, the local government has a strong incentive to potentially deter or suppress those unrest from occurring again. Okay. The third part is looking at the sort of how to potentially working with the government and gaining access to government data can benefit the AI firms. We're going to look at what these AI firms are producing. So one thing that makes us life slightly easier, given that many of these AI facial recognition AI firms are not publicly listed firms, is that all the software producers in China are required to register the software with China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. So we can look at sort of all the software that's been registered to the government by these 8,000 AI firms, and we can look at whether these firms at what point are issuing new softwares. Sort of including major upgrades, but oftentimes sort of new software from scratch. And importantly, we're also going to categorizing whether these softwares are intended for the government uses, but also intended for the commercial uses that government may or may not care about. For example, the retail space tracking system that could very much benefit from accessing to the same data that local police department is giving these facial recognition AI firms to. Okay, so that's
how do you find someone to manually label 13,000 software? It's kind of
yeah. Well, it's a pretty large team of undergrad RAs who for each software there's a description of the software uses. For example, tracking system for retail space and so on. So it's not super detailed, but enough information to give us a clue on what's the intended users. And it takes about a few months to actually label all those. But we're talking about sort of close to 500,000 software, so we couldn't do this all by hand. So we labeled enough so that we can do the correct prediction on these software categorizations. Yeah, and it's actually
it's written in Chinese, right? So everything is in Chinese. So
yeah, these are written in Chinese. Yes.
You don't have to know Chinese. Okay.
Yeah. So it's actually very crucial for us to categorize the software, because if I'm going to show you that if an AI firm works with the Chinese government by winning procurement contracts and the AI firms produce more government software, that's in part going to be mechanical. I probably produce the software for the procurement contract. But if that AI firm is simultaneously also doing more for the commercial market without much of the crowding out, that's going to be much more surprising, and that's going to have implications about sort of these firms being pushed to the innovation frontier, and hence we need to sort of be able to categorize what these firms are doing, or what customers they're serving. You should have a lot of potential speculations that if these firms just won a major government contract. Take the example of, say, Boeing in the early days were winning contracts with the U.S. government. That could generate a lot of crowd out of commercial activity because I just won a government contract. I might want to reallocate a lot of my engineers and resources internally to satisfy the government buyer, and that will make the commercial activity of all these firms become less active.
They substitute, right? They substitute instead of like
exactly, yeah. So I'm going to show you sort of on net of those forces that these are major government contracts. The firms might actually benefit and pushed forward in a commercial area where the Chinese government don't have a direct interest per se.
On the type of commercial activities, is it the same kind of thing like surveillance, face recognition, or is it more like diverse than that?
So one example is the customer tracking. There are a couple of others that's about sort of looking for a lot of face recognition commercial application. I mean, commercial is used in quotation mark in some cases. It's, for example, face recognition used in schools or used in factories where workers are being monitored or workers are potentially being tracked, for example, for attendance and so on.
Mm-hmm.
Which oftentimes, again, you can see it could be very much the same algorithms at some intermediate level with the kind of face recognition that the police department is demanding or try to build. Okay, so let me go back to the arrows and try to show you how this works domestically. The first regime I want to show you is that when so here when I talk about local governments, we're talking about city governments in China because there's about a bit more than 200 city governments. Each of them have their own sort of procurement system. So our question is that when local city governments just experience an arrest in a particular quarter, does that prompt that city governments to buy more face recognition AI among its police department in a subsequent quarter? Okay, the timing here doesn't quite matter. We can do quarter, we can do months. We're going to see very similar effect, but quarter is the one I'm going to use in the baseline. Okay, so importantly, we're going to control for city fixed effects and time fixed effects. So which means that if one city just purchased a lot of face recognition, that's going to help constant. And we're going to look at if you just experience a unrest in the previous quarter relative to yourself, do you have a boost in your AI procurement? We're also going to take out all the over time sort of countrywide trend in procurement for face recognition. So this is just exploiting very local and very high frequency, relatively high frequency variation. Okay, so on the y-axis, I'm showing you the local police department's procurement of face recognition AI. On the x-axis, I'm showing you quarters before the unrest occurred to the quarter where the unrest is taking place. That's marked by the red vertical line, all the way to 3 quarters after the unrest occurs. Okay, so what you see here from this figure is that there's no sort of pattern of local governments preemptively buy AI, anticipating the unrest from occurring. The line is pretty flat all the way until sort of the quarter where unrest took place. But the quarter after the unrest has happened, and that's roughly about the timeline of the fastest procurement that can go through the bureaucracy in China. You see a pretty large jump in local government police department buying unrest, and this particularly is happening in the local police department, not happening in any other arms of local government. So this really is the public security arms of government demanding more face recognition AI. Okay, and given that these are service contracts, once you purchase it, you don't need to continue to purchase it every quarter. We see this very quickly taper down 2 quarters afterwards. Okay, so it seems to be the governments are very much responsive to those local unrest shocks and procuring AI accordingly. Okay, of course, for those of you who are familiar with the economic literature and worried about causality, you know, in the paper we had a lot of alternative empirical strategy where we can look at, for example, just using the unrest that's induced by good weather, conditioning on all the weather conditions in the nearby region, so that using the intuition that, you know, holding fixed people's grievances, if the weather is extremely terrible, there's a lower chance that there's going to be unrest break out on the street. We're going to use the weather condition as a way to predict unrest, location by location and day by day in China. And just use the weather-induced unrest, and we see still a pattern that, you know, the local governments are responsive to that arguably exogenous rising unrest occurrence by purchasing.
David, so you're talking about like 200 cities, right? Like 200 city governments. So what would be the average size of, you know, area, like number of inhabitants, like tens of millions of people in the city?
Yes. Yeah.
But they're still geographically, concentrated, right? It's one area, so one weather event will affect the whole city. Actually, or you said that the city is so large that
right. So yeah. So
weather events or
right. So we're talking mostly about sort of much of the weather that has predictive power in terms of predicting whether unrest occurring is rainfall and temperature, which is going to be at the city level, or like sort of, you know, thunderstorms and so on. So
when it rains too much, people go and protest, or how does it work exactly? So
yeah, so conditioning on if there's some protests happening on a given day, so there are some things that people might be unhappy about. Yeah. If your local region has a super high rainfall or extremely hot weather or extremely cold weather, there's a lower likelihood that there's actually going to be a physical unrest.
Okay. Yes. Yeah. That's why you do 1 quarter to the quarter. I think they use a quarter.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So in addition to AI, we also see some pattern that makes us really think that, you know, this is not a random choice that government just make about just buying more facial recognition AI, but this is actually part of a package of things that the government try to do to enhance or upgrade their technological control. AI is only useful when a camera is good. So we see that roughly at the same time when the governments are buying more facial recognition AI, we also see a flow of procurement contracts for high-resolution surveillance cameras. And potentially sort of, you know, we don't know what's the status quo, but to the extent that there's some cities that need to upgrade the camera system, we do see that's happening, again, in responding to unrest occurred.
But you don't track it like you track the software. You don't track that these companies develop better cameras after they got they develop better commercial cameras after they have a government contract, for instance.
Yeah, so many of the AI firms are software forward firms. So when the governments are buying cameras, they oftentimes are buying from hardware. I mean, there are firms who do both. There's a couple of the big ones do both, but they don't necessarily need to produce both the software but also the cameras. The second part, which is also fairly interesting, is that we also see the labor side of the police department starts to change. So we look at all the labor hiring by the local police department, the new policemen that they're hiring. We find that when they purchase more facial recognition AI, there's a lower overall number of hires of the police department. This we only observe year by year, so not quarter by quarter. So that's less sort of accurate, precise than the previous result. But once you purchase more facial recognition AI, the next year you hire less police department. Now that could be because, you know, you've spent a lot of money on facial recognition AI, you simply run out of money on labor. But conditioning on the number of people you hire, we see a larger share of the new police hire that's explicitly for desk jobs that require higher human capital than sort of, you know, high school graduates who potentially are being put on the streets and holding batons. So that seems like, to the extent that, you know, you do need to have higher human capital to be able to monitor the AI system and to incorporate that AI facial recognition system to the police department, we see the labor side start to adjust at least marginally as well, alongside with upgrade of the technology.
And you can find, so these like 200 cities publish statistics on these, like, you know, so desk jobs versus, like, you know,
yeah, so
jobs.
They wouldn't say explicit desk jobs, but they would say sort of what's the requirement for that position. So no, so that will be changing, going from the college degree is not required to someone who requires some computer skills to be hired. Now we make the inference that that's more likely to be for desk jobs because it happens sort of right after that when the facial recognition AI is being procured.
It'd be interesting to do that in the US too.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Okay, so that's on the purchase side. So what you take away from that is that when local protest happens in China, where local governments has a huge amount of incentive to make sure protests are not happening, or places are politically quiet, governments are going towards facial recognition AI as a potential tool to help them maintain political control. Okay? The second question I want to ask is that tool useful to make protests actually less likely to happen in the future, which is presumably what the government intended the AI to help. Okay, so this is going to be a slightly harder question to answer because I just showed you that the past protests predict procurement in the future. So then to look at sort of whether procurement then can predict lower future unrest, the causality is going to be very quite complicated. Okay, so our strategy is the following: we're going to look at going back to the weather example, holding everything else constant. We're going to see a pattern where on the day where the weather is fairly good or conducive to protest, I'm going to call them conducive weather on the x-axis, you should see an upward sloping line between unrest events to weather being conducive to unrest, being warm and sort of no rain and so on. Okay, so our test is that when the local governments purchase more AI, we can look at the stock of facial recognition AI being purchased by the local police department up until that point. Did the stock of facial recognition AI temper this relationship between conducive weather to unrest, which would imply that even if the weather is conducive to unrest, because the weather is fairly moderate and good for large public gathering, unrest is still not occurring, potentially because of deterrence and potentially because of some other forces that the facial recognition is operating through. Okay, so this is exactly what I'm plotting here. If we were to focus on the red line here, this is plotted among the places that have low stock of AI, facial recognition AI by the local police department. You see upward sloping line. So that means that as the weather become more conducive to unrest, because the weather is being favorable to outdoor gatherings, you indeed see a higher tendency for unrest from occurring in those regions. But among the places, and also this is time changing because the place can go from low stock of AI to high stock of AI because the government buys more AI. As the government buys more AI in those regions, it turns into a high stock of AI location and in time, this line becomes flatter, which means that even at times in which the weather is fairly conducive to unrest, holding everything else constant, there's a lower likelihood of unrest from occurring. And this flattening of the line would take that as a strong indication that the stock of AI purchases is making unrest less likely to take place in the future. So police department is able to achieve what they hope to achieve from purchasing the AI.
All these data are pre-COVID, right? I think this is before.
Yeah, we stopped everything in 2019. So we don't know what happens in COVID. So yeah. Okay, the final thing I want to show you on the China side is that what happened to the AI firms. So the previous two results combined together is showing you AI is a technology that benefit the regime. The regime buys more AI when they're more local unrest, and the more AI it buys, it seems to help the regimes to remain stable, at least locally. Now, what happened to the AI firm side? Do they benefit anything from working with the government and importantly potentially accessing a lot of government data, because local police department is the bureaucracy that controls all the personal data and controls the video streams of all the CCTV cameras on the streets and so on, as almost all the police department around the world. Okay, so what I'm going to show you here is I'm going to look at the number of software that's being produced by all the AI firms who have at least one government procurement contracts. I'm going to look at the quarters before the firm gets its very first procurement contract with a local police department and 2 quarters after. Okay, this is controlling for firm fixbacks, which means that we're not going to be looking at across firms. This is within the same firm, just quarter before you get your very first contract with the local police department to 2 quarters after you get the contract. Okay, we're also going to take advantage that different firms can get their first contract different time. So your firm gets your first contract in January 2018. My firm gets its first contract in March 2018. I can control for the overall time trend of the software production around the whole industry, and looking at just within each firm, the relative time to your first contract arrival time. Okay, so this quarter is not necessarily overlapping with the calendar time. Okay, so as you would expect, the government software production increases almost immediately after your very first procurement contract with the local police department. So there's no preemptively production. The line is pretty flat, and then the firm start to produce on average about 2 more software pieces, new software that's intended for the government uses, about 8 quarters after the very first procurement contract. Now, what's quite surprising is that we see a almost simultaneous increase with a slightly bigger magnitude even on the commercial side. Because as the firms start to produce more software for the government, immediately they're also releasing new software for the commercial side. Okay, again, this is within firm. Okay, this simultaneous increase, and our interpretation is that a lot of this software has already been built. The firms are just waiting for the new data to come in to fine-tune some of the parameters, and once the parameters is being fine-tuned, they release the software not for both government and for the commercial side.
Do we have an idea of the size of the revenues, like something like $1 or 1 renminbi or yuan of government sales? How much is it in terms of private sale or commercial sales? Is it like 1-to-1 or more or less?
Yeah, so we don't know the actual dollar amount. So, but from a couple of companies who we can see the balance sheet, it seems to be that people generally think that about a third of these speech recognition AI firms' revenue are coming from government contracts, and the 2/3 coming from commercial side. I think that number is coming from 2019, so then it could look very different today. And I don't have a good sense of how this number will compare to a speech recognition.
Yeah, we don't know the dynamic. We don't know how much it generates. Right? So it will. So we know they produce commercial software.
Yeah.
But we don't know how much they are selling.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So this is just this is the total software amount, which is one measure of product innovation that economists typically use, but that does not translate into commercial side. Okay. Now, one way to look at how good these firms become is the next one I'm going to show you, which is we generally think that if the firms are actually pushed to the frontier, you should see them start to export globally. They become sort of competitive in a global market, which is exactly what I'm going for. So let me actually quickly conclude on the China side. So the 3 links I just show you. Local instability in China makes local governments want to buy more face recognition AI. Buying more face recognition AI makes the local governments more likely to remain stable in the next period. So it's a technology that helps the regime to maintain political control. And accessing local governments' data and getting governments' demand for the technology really also benefits these firms. They produce or innovate more, not only for the government, but also importantly, they innovate more for the commercial side. Okay. So the next question for the next couple of minutes I have is that, to the extent these are our products that you can buy and sell globally, what's the international ramification for this, and who is buying this from China? Is China selling more to the rest of the world, and what governments under what conditions are buying this from China? Okay, I'm going to show you some evidence we had on the international diffusion of this technology. Now, global trade on AI is notoriously bad in terms of measurement. Trade data typically don't measure any service or products trade. So we'll have to build this from scratch. So in a nutshell, how we measure global trade in face recognition AI is that we're going to take a list of all the firms in the world who produce something that looks like a face recognition AI. And we're going to go to those firms' press releases, all the media reports about the firms, and any mention about a firm on the internet, and look at whether the firms is selling a product that's to an entity that's not in the country of its headquarters. Okay, we're gonna put together this list deal by deal in terms of exports. So an example of an observation in our data set is that a safe city service is being being sold from Huawei to Laos. That will be an export from China to Laos. Bosch is equipping Hong Kong, Zhuhai, Macau bridge with its customized AI security solution. So that's a German firm selling speech recognition AI to China. So overall, over this period, we observe about 1,600 facial recognition AI trade deals coming from 36 exporting countries to about 136 importing countries. Okay? So the first question we want to ask with this trade data is that, does China has a competitive advantage in facial recognition AI? Let me show you the raw data first. On the top panel, this is all the trade deals coming out of China. So each link is going from China as an exporter to a country that's an importer, and the thickness of the link is the number of deals that we see in this time period. Okay? On the bottom picture is the trade deals coming out of the U.S. Okay, so already you see that China's exporting more in absolute term compared to the U.S. To more countries, and then more deals that's coming out of China. Okay, this is in fact sort of not to be taken for granted, even though China is a pretty large country in terms of exports. If we were to compare this with any other frontier technology that's being exported to China, we actually see that this is one of the few technologies where China has a differentially higher degree of exporting. China is exporting a lot of stuff, but very rarely in the frontier technology. And AI has a differentially high likelihood of being exported from China. Okay? So if we were to estimate the degree of competitive advantage of China for each of the 15 frontier technology that's the OECD has been labeled as frontier technology, and on AI, which is I put on the red panel here, AI actually has the highest competitive advantage of China relative to others. The other sectors where there is the Chinese competitive advantage are radioactive materials for nuclear weapons, steam turbines for solar for clean energy, which China also has a fairly high share of the global market. But AI really is in absolute magnitude dwarf this other sector in terms of how much China is being exported into the rest of the world. Okay. Now the second part, who's buying this from China? Well, now let me color code the earlier picture to the destination country's political regime. Okay, the red arrows indicating if the regime is autocracy themselves or a weak democracy that's in the consolidation phase. Okay, the blue arrows are regimes that are mature democracy that are fairly stable in terms of the political institution. Okay, so here you see that for the United States, 70% of its export of facial recognition AI is going towards mature democracies, which on average are richer and are buying more technology. And only 30% of the US export of facial recognition AI is towards autocracies or weak democracies. For China, that share is about 50-50. Okay, so in relative terms, China is exporting a lot more relatively to autocracies and other weak democracies than what the US is doing. If we were to look at sort of the disproportional import of China's technology among autocracies and weak democracies, facial recognition AI, in fact, is the only sector that China is exporting among frontier technology where there is this autocracy and weak democracy bias. Again, in general, weak democracy and autocracy don't buy a lot of frontier technology because on average they're poor, and it's only the rich countries who buy frontier technology. But AI is one big exception where weak democracies and autocracies buys a lot, in particular from China. Okay. The final figure I'm going to show you is that we see the exact same pattern as in China domestically, where when local governments around the world are experiencing unrest themselves, there's a higher likelihood of them buying more AI on the year when they experience unrest. Okay, that's not the case if local governments is a mature democracy. When the mature democracy experience unrest, they're not purchasing more AI from China. But when autocracies and weak democracies experience AI, we see an increase in their import of China's facial recognition AI technology.
Oh, can you show the previous slide, David? I look at the category. Yeah. Is there anything about like military weapons or like that armaments or these kind of things in these categories?
So you can, I mean, a lot of this could have dual use nature, laser and beam processes and so on. Or
this is give you an area where like China would be exporting probably a lot to autocracies or weak democracies for their armies or this kind of thing. I think China is a big arm exporter now, especially for like low and medium middle level income, right? Because
right. So radioactive material, for example, you can consider that is mostly for nuclear.
Okay.
There you actually don't see on average a autocracy biases in the export.
Radioactive is kind of quite specific, but we could say guns or small like military vehicles or helicopters or these kind of things would be interesting.
Yeah, so I agree with you. So here we take the sort of the 15 sectors considered as frontier tech by OECD, and then the constraint is that we need to then match this back to the trade data, and these are the categories where trade data is being reported on. Okay. So let me actually end some discussion. So the first sort of the main takeaway, and I think this is already raised by you, is that this sheds some light of our understanding of other episodes in history. We're not saying that AI is unique or unprecedented, but it does seem that this alignment between autocratic governments and the frontier innovation is not very common, but it did happen sort of a few times in the past. For example, aerospace technology and chemical engineering. You can think about that in pure Germany, where when a technology becomes useful for the regime and the regime can provide a useful input into technology, that will be the condition where you might expect to see such alignment. Now, when we talk about the trade part and who's buying this from China, to the extent that this is technology that's being exported from China disproportionately to countries that has weaker institutional setup, it's important to think about what should we do about it. And there, I think conceptually, we should think about AI as the kind of product that generates global externalities. Now, it's not necessarily sort of straightforward to think about exactly what kind of externalities we should think about AI, and what should be worried about. If we're particularly worried about the input of AI, there are facial images that's going towards the building of China's facial recognition algorithms that we don't think is as ethically collected. Well, then we should think about AI in the same way we think about goods that use input that are unethically sourced, such as child labor. It's not about the goods per se that we don't like, but it's about the way that goods is being produced that we don't like. Okay? If we think that it's not about the production process of AI that we don't like, but it's about how AI is being used for generating authoritarian regimes, political stability that we may not like, then that's going to be very similar to the way we think about polluting goods, where the goods is generating some political spillover that's not being fully internalized by the producing country, and which is think about similar regulation when we think about global pollution. Okay, and finally, I think this is also being alluded to a bit, which is sort of in some sense what the U.S. government has been thinking about AI, which is think about AI as a dual-purpose technology. It's a technology that both civilian sector is being using and military sector is being using, and we should regulate AI in the same way that we regulate dual-use technology. Now, the potential danger for that is that where do we draw the line between sort of where the civilian use and military purpose of AI is, and does every single component of AI production is going to become dual use, or only parts of AI production is generally dual use? And that's very much sort of a question that's not straightforward and pretty ambiguous, but that's very much going to determine how we're going to think about potential AI regulation. All right, let me end here, and I would love to hear any thoughts or comments.
Thank you. Let me stop the recording here.